Something strange is happening in modern relationships, and almost nobody has the courage to say it out loud. You meet a stunning woman, the type who walks into a room and instantly shifts the gravity. She's successful, polished, confident, the kind of woman who looks like she has everything figured out. But the moment the conversation turns to her love life, her emotional world, or her past relationships, something cracks. Behind the perfect makeup and flawless social media aesthetic, there is chaos. Not the loud, dramatic chaos you might expect, but a quieter, more dangerous kind. Confusion, delusion, anxiety, emotional volatility, and a complete disconnect from how relationships actually function. And here's the uncomfortable truth nobody talks about. The more attractive a woman is, the more distorted her emotional reality tends to become. Not because she's shallow, not because she's narcissistic, but because the world around her stops telling her the truth the moment she becomes beautiful. You don't realize how deep this goes until you watch it up close. A gorgeous colleague breaks down because her perfect boyfriend suddenly left. A stunning friend cannot understand why every man she dates becomes distant. A breathtaking woman with a brilliant career destroys her own relationships and genuinely believes it's everyone else's fault. It's like watching a psychological glitch operate in real time. And none of this starts in adulthood. It begins the moment she becomes attractive, which for some women is 12, 13, 14 years old. She's still a child internally, but the world treats her like she's already a woman. Men stare, boys compete, teachers soften, strangers compliment. The world bends around her in ways she cannot process. That's where the fracture begins. Beauty becomes both a blessing and a curse, a source of endless validation, and the root of catastrophic emotional blindness. Because from that moment on, she stops hearing the one thing every human needs in order to become emotionally stable: the truth. She doesn't get corrected, she doesn't get challenged, she doesn't get reality checks. She gets praised, agreed with, validated, accommodated. Even when she's wrong, even when she's hurting herself, even when she's destroying her own future. And people assume she just naturally handles everything. But what she's actually doing is drowning quietly in a reality she was never prepared for. She becomes someone who is brilliant at her job, but catastrophically confused in love. Someone who can manage teams, but cannot manage her emotions. Someone who looks like she's winning, but is actually spiraling. And here's the twist. She has no idea any of this is happening. Because how can you know you're lost when the world keeps telling you you're perfect? This isn't about blaming beautiful women. This is about exposing the invisible psychological trap they fall into, a trap created by constant validation, distorted incentives, and a lifetime of lies disguised as compliments. And once you understand how deep this goes, you'll never look at perfect women the same way again. The collapse doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in hundreds of tiny transactions where reality is quietly traded for validation. She says something unfair, and instead of hearing, "You're wrong," she hears, "You're brave." She tests boundaries, and instead of pushback, she gets applause. She behaves recklessly in dating, and instead of consequences, there's a line of men willing to audition for the same role she fires every month. Bit by bit, the feedback loop that shapes a normal person's judgment gets replaced by a mirror maze that reflects only what she wants to see. This is how truth goes extinct in her world. Not because people hate her, but because they want something from her. Attraction alters incentives. Honesty stops being the winning strategy, strategic agreement does. The equation becomes painfully simple. Tell her what's real and lose access, or tell her what she wants and keep your seat at the table. Most will choose the seat. And so she grows older without ever developing the muscles that ordinary girls build by necessity: self-confrontation, restraint, negotiation, humility, repair. Watch it play out in micro scenes. At work, a junior analyst risks her career by suggesting the deck needs rewriting. The room freezes. The beautiful lead smiles tightly and says, "Thanks, but we're good." Later, the VP tells the analyst, "Pick your battles." Translation: in this orbit, accuracy loses to aura. After the meeting, every man who wants her approval repeats the same line: "You crushed it." The product still ships with avoidable errors, but no one connects cause and effect because compliment culture fogs the glass. Or take dating. She texts 3 men the same night to keep her options open, cancels last minute, posts a photo captioned "Know Your Worth," then wonders why the only men who stay are either chaos junkies or men with zero boundaries. The stable ones leave quietly. They don't submit a resignation letter to Instagram. But to her, departures register as "men are trash," not as a referendum on her strategy. Why would she suspect her approach when every comment section shouts, "Queen, never settle"? Validation isn't just nice, it's intoxicating. It becomes a drug with 2 cruel side effects. First, tolerance. The more she gets, the less it satisfies. Second, dependency. The moment praise slows, panic begins. That's why the presentation must be perfect, and the selfie must hit the exact angle, and the boyfriend must be extraordinary, and the dinner must be Michelin level, and the birthday must look cinematic. Not because she's evil, but because validation has replaced regulation. When likes function as anesthesia, the smallest discomfort feels like surgery without painkillers. Therapists see the wreckage. She arrives intelligent, articulate, certain. She isn't there for discovery, she's there for confirmation. The moment the therapist offers friction, "You might be contributing to this pattern," the room turns cold. She tries another therapist, then another, until she finds the one who calls her trauma sacred and her patterns protective. The stories stay the same, only the narrators change. Healing stalls because truth still can't get clearance to land. There's a darker economic layer too: intention inflation. When she was 19, a glance was a currency. At 25, a bouquet. At 30, a trip. As the market adjusts, the baseline rises. The price of feeling special keeps climbing, and yet the emotional value keeps falling. What once made her feel adored now registers as background noise. The result is permanent scarcity in the middle of abundance. Thousands of DMs, and not a single secure attachment. And the men? They adapt. Some lie to survive. Some leave to stay sane. A rare few tell the truth and get exiled for it. Ironically, those rare men are the ones who could anchor her reality. But selection pressure removes them from her ecosystem. She's left surrounded by 2 types: the worshippers, who reinforce the delusion, and the wolves, who exploit it. Both keep her stuck. The tragedy is not that she's shallow, it's that she's undereducated in the one subject that decides everything: accountability. She never learned how to hear no without rage, wait without panic, "you're wrong" without collapse. She learned how to acquire attention, not how to convert it into love. She learned how to attract interest, not how to maintain respect. She learned how to win the opening act, not how to survive the middle. There is a way out, but the exit is guarded by a door she's been trained to fear. Sincere contradiction. The first time someone says, "This is on you," it will feel like an attack. The second time, like betrayal. The third time, like oxygen. Because beneath the armor of certainty lives a woman who is exhausted from pretending. She doesn't actually want more applause. She wants gravity. She wants someone who won't be bribed by beauty. She wants a mirror that doesn't lie. Before that can happen, the system must fail her. Publicly, painfully, undeniably. The relationship she thought was guaranteed crumbles. The audience doesn't clap on cue. The perfect image doesn't stop the 3 a.m. ache. That's the crack where daylight gets in. If she's lucky, she'll meet one person who values her enough to risk her temporary hatred in exchange for her long-term freedom. If she's luckier, she'll become that person for herself. And when the truth finally walks back into the room, it won't arrive with a scream. It will arrive with a sentence no one has dared to say. You're not broken, your incentives are. And here is where the illusion finally collapses. Not with a breakup, not with a fight, not with a dramatic meltdown. It collapses in silence, that painful moment where reality finally reaches a person who has been insulated from truth her entire life. Because what nobody tells extremely attractive women, and what they often realize far too late, is that beauty creates a psychological world with no friction, no resistance, no accountability, no real cause and effect. Everything simply works. Doors open, problems disappear, attention flows, mistakes get forgiven instantly, and compliments replace consequences. But here's the twist. A life without friction is a life without growth. And when someone grows up in this frictionless reality, they develop blind spots so massive they eventually become psychological sinkholes. Not because they're broken, not because they're crazy, but because no one ever allowed them to experience the one thing that builds emotional intelligence: honest feedback. When a person is surrounded by people who constantly tell them what they want to hear, they begin to live inside a world where their own perspective becomes the only reality. Their beliefs go unchallenged, their assumptions go unrevised, their strategies go uncorrected. And slowly, silently, they lose the ability to understand why relationships collapse, why people pull away, why they feel empty despite endless attention, why validation never satisfies, why intimacy terrifies them, why connection feels impossible. Because beauty creates the illusion of competence in areas they've never actually trained. It's like giving someone a pilot's uniform and convincing them they can fly a plane simply because everyone claps when they enter the room. For years, she mistakes praise for wisdom, attention for affection, flattery for truth, desire for loyalty, validation for value. And nobody corrects her. Why would they? Men want access, women want approval, society wants her image, not her insight. So the people who surround her, coworkers, friends, lovers, never give her the one gift she needs most: reality. And when reality finally arrives, it arrives violently. When beauty no longer guarantees devotion, when attention no longer satisfies, when relationships no longer bend around her expectations, when the world stops rearranging itself to suit her emotions, this moment hits like emotional whiplash. Because she's not losing her mind, she's encountering the real world for the first time. A world where people say no, men have standards, consequences exist, love requires skills, relationships require giving, boundaries matter, truth isn't optional. And this sudden collision creates the internal experience many mistake for instability. But it's not instability. It's the shock of waking up from a lifetime of strategic lies. Most people learn lessons through small failures over many years. But for someone who has been protected from truth their entire life, all the lessons arrive at once. Every flaw becomes visible. Every blind spot becomes obvious. Every pattern becomes undeniable. Not because she's mentally ill, but because she's finally seeing what everyone else has been navigating since adolescence. Beauty delayed the consequences, but consequences always collect their debt. This is the silent tragedy nobody talks about. The more the world worships you, the less prepared you become for the moments when the world stops. And when that happens, the emotional collapse looks dramatic. But it's not madness. It's the overdue arrival of truth. And truth always arrives with interest. Here's the part almost no one understands. The part that turns this entire phenomenon from a simple dating problem into a full-blown psychological spiral. When someone grows up inside a world built on flattery, adoration, and selective truth, they don't just receive false information. They develop an entire identity around that information. And when reality contradicts that identity, the mind doesn't adjust gently. It breaks. Let me explain why. Most people form their sense of self through friction, failures, rejections, disappointments, boundaries. These experiences shape character, humility, adaptability, maturity. They build emotional muscles the same way physical stress builds strength. But extremely attractive women? They grow up in a world with no emotional gravity. Everything floats. Nothing weighs them down. Nothing resists. Nothing forces evolution. So they develop confidence without competence, self-esteem without self-awareness, standards without reciprocity, expectations without effort, beliefs without evidence. And because no one challenges them, they never challenge themselves. So when relationships start failing, not just once, but repeatedly, something terrifying happens inside their mind. They don't know where to place the blame. The world has conditioned them to believe they are the prize. Their entire identity rests on the assumption that nothing is ever their fault. Men compete for them. People compliment them. Attention comes guaranteed. So when love falls apart, when devotion fades, when men pull away, when admiration evaporates, the mind enters identity crisis, because they were never taught how to interpret negative outcomes. Here's the internal dialogue they never admit out loud. Why didn't he stay? Why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? Why do all my relationships collapse? Why does it feel like everyone leaves? What's wrong with me? And because they've been conditioned to believe there cannot be something wrong with them, their mind reaches for explanations that protect the ego but destroy the psyche. He was intimidated by me. He couldn't handle a real woman. He was insecure. He's a narcissist. All men are trash. I deserve better. These aren't conclusions, they're defense mechanisms. They prevent emotional collapse in the moment, but they sabotage emotional stability in the long run. Because every time they choose ego over accountability, the mind drifts one step further from reality. This is how instability begins. Not from trauma, not from abuse, but from decades of never receiving the emotional data required to develop actual relational intelligence. Let me paint the picture clearly. When the world removes consequences, the person loses calibration. When the world removes resistance, the person loses perspective. When the world removes honesty, the person loses reality. And when reality finally arrives, it hits them with the force of 20 years of suppressed truth. That's why the reaction looks disproportionate. Intense anxiety, spiral thinking, emotional outbursts, hyperfixation on relationships, fear of abandonment, idealization devaluation cycles, rage when challenged, extreme sensitivity to criticism, catastrophic overreaction to small issues. This isn't madness. This is a mind that never learned how to interpret discomfort, now drowning in it. Because beauty may open doors, but it also closes the development of emotional resilience. And here's the cruelest twist. The prettier she is, the harsher the collapse. Why? Because the bigger the illusion, the louder it shatters. For years she told herself, "I'm special, I'm rare, I'm the prize, I deserve the best." But reality doesn't care about affirmations. Reality cares about reciprocity, character, and emotional maturity. And when she finally loses someone she actually cares about, someone she cannot replace with a flood of new admirers, that's when the psychological earthquake hits. Suddenly, beauty isn't enough. Charm isn't enough. Attention isn't enough. For the first time in her life, she realizes the world doesn't bend for her anymore. And this realization is so destabilizing, it often looks like mental illness. But it's not illness, it's impact. Impact of truth. Impact of consequence. Impact of finally meeting a man who isn't influenced by beauty, validation, or emotional theaters. A man who walked away and didn't come back. Nothing destabilizes someone who grew up on guaranteed attention more than genuine indifference. Because indifference isn't rejection, it's something far worse. It's irrelevance. And that is the one thing beauty cannot protect them from.
Here's the final truth. The one no influencer, no therapist, no dating coach, no glossy self-help book will ever say out loud. Attractive women aren't mentally ill. They're emotionally unprepared for a world that finally stopped lying to them. And when the lies stop, the collapse begins. Let's break down the final stage of this entire psychological spiral, the part most people misinterpret, the part that looks like chaos, desperation, inconsistency, volatility, drama, self-sabotage, but is actually something much darker. The mind trying to rebuild itself without the tools it was never given. Because eventually, no matter how beautiful, adored, privileged, or validated she was, reality always collects its debt. And when it arrives all at once. That's why the downfall feels sudden. From the outside, it looks like she snapped overnight, but it didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, silently, invisibly, accumulating over years like emotional rust beneath perfect skin. The final stage begins the moment she realizes this brutal truth. Beauty gave her power, but it never gave her wisdom. And now she needs wisdom more than power. Because power can get you attention, admiration, lust, excitement. Wisdom is what maintains love, stability, peace, and long-term connection. Power attracts men, wisdom keeps them. But here's the tragedy. The world trained her in power, not wisdom. So when a man finally leaves, not the low-effort men, not the replaceable ones, but the one she actually wanted, she spirals not because she lost him, but because she now realizes she never understood why she lost him. That not knowing is what drives her crazy. Not heartbreak, confusion. Not loneliness, bewilderment. Not missing him, not understanding him. This is why the final collapse looks so dramatic. She's trying to solve a problem she was never taught the rules for. She tries everything. Posting stories to get his attention, selfies designed for jealousy, silent treatments, emotional breakdowns, anger, self-pity, new healed woman quotes, therapy speak, fake empowerment, false bravado,
late-night messages she deletes, endless stalking, pretending she doesn't care, pretending she's moved on, pretending she's better without him, pretending she chose this. It's not manipulation, it's panic. The kind of panic that comes from realizing she finally met a man she cannot control, cannot impress, cannot perform for, a man immune to beauty, a man who sees through the act, a man who isn't hypnotized by surface-level perfection. For the first time in her life, she encounters a man who values consistency over aesthetics, accountability over complaints, growth over validation, peace over drama, truth over flattery, and character over charm. She's not used to being evaluated on those metrics, so she fails them. And she knows she failed. That's the real pain. That's the pain that keeps her awake. That's the pain she tries to numb. That's the pain she tries to hide behind confidence, feminism, empowerment, and Instagram. But it still eats her alive. How could I be so beautiful and still lose? How could I have everything and still ruin it? How could he walk away from me? What do I even offer other than my looks? These questions are her final undoing, because they expose the deepest fear no attractive woman will ever admit. What if beauty was the only thing I was good at? That's why the collapse looks like mental illness. It's not actual insanity, it's identity death. Her entire self-worth was external. Her validation was outsourced. Her feedback loop was contaminated. Her relationships were built on deception, not because she lied, but because everyone lied to her. Now, she's standing in front of a mirror that finally reflects the truth. No filters, no simps, no admirers, no praise, no inflated feedback, no distorted reality, just her. Her character, her emotional habits, her patterns, her accountability, her emptiness, and her potential, which she never had to grow until now. This is where the story splits into two possible endings. One, the tragic ending. She continues seeking validation, continues blaming men, continues repeating the cycle, continues chasing attention, continues avoiding accountability, and ends up alone, angry, confused, and resentful. 2. The rebirth ending. She finally drops the ego, drops the delusions, drops the entitlement, drops the fantasy, and for the first time in her life begins to rebuild herself from the inside. With humility, with truth, with self-awareness, with discipline, with character. That path is rare, but it's real. Because some attractive women eventually learn the ultimate lesson. Beauty opens the door, but character decides whether anyone wants to stay inside. And that realization, the one she should have learned at 14, but only learns at 30, is the moment she stops being a victim of her looks and finally becomes someone worthy of the love she's been chasing all her life.